Ladies and gentlemen, it's nice to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight, and happy holidays. Huzzah! I'm here with my friend John Edgington. Hello, John. Say something intelligent.
Hello, we chose tonight for Reggie's presentation because we figured nobody would be underway.
No, it is a terrible night here in Annapolis, Maryland, and I'm awfully glad you could join us for this. There could be no more perfect night than tonight, with the rain pouring down and the cold wind blowing. For those of you who are joining us up in the Boston area, I know you've got a lot of snow going on there, and sorry to hear it. Anyway, John's joining us from Chestertown, Maryland, and we got a little bit of some ground rules for you guys. So having said that, let me go over a couple things. You may notice, I hope you notice, that we have a chat running. And if you go to the bottom of your screens, you'll see a little chat button, I believe. We also have a Q&A. So we're going to be talking with Reggie Townsend. And as you have questions, type them into your Q&A box. And at the end of the session, we'll go through them. And John and I will do the best to make sense of what you wrote. Oh my God, help us all. Aside from that, we're all hustling on our way to Christmas. So let's get this started and think of warmer places. Reggie, welcome. It's great to see you.
Well, thank you. I'm here, and we'll try not to run the ship aground tonight.
I know you won't. Anyway, we want to thank you very much for spending your time with us here with the American Schooner Association and the Great Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race. And Reg, if you are ready, let's find your share screen button and get over to your presentation.
Okay.
All right.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Reggie Townsend, and I'm the designer, builder, and owner of Rainbow. I'd like to thank the American Schooner Association and the Great Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race for giving us this opportunity to go over a presentation on how the ship came to be. The story begins many years ago in Japan, in a harbor called Aburatsubo, with another little ship called Argo. Argo is a three-sail bateau designed by Luther A. Tarbach, built by Fuji Boat Works, and launched in 1956. She was purchased by my dad in 1959 from an airline pilot who had run out of money building her. I lived aboard from 1961 until 1967. There was no TV or other entertainment on board except for Argo's shortwave radio. And other than the Armed Forces Network, there was only Radio Hanoi, Radio Peking, and Radio Moscow. And none of these held teenage attention for very long. I had, however, lots of books. I got to know the numerous adult sailors who took me under their wings and became my influencers. Ned Glenn and his H-36 Claymore taught me most of what I knew about sailing. He introduced me to Hershoff, Chappell, Ashley, Glencannon. Earl Reynolds, a circumnavigator well known in the 50s and 60s, introduced me to Hershoff's common sense and to the parameters for single handing. Miles and Burl Smeaton, who visited Aburatsubo for several weeks and whom I got to know well, included me in many discussions about heavy weather sailing and open ocean attitude. Bob Herring of Lubell, how to single hand aloft. Bob and Nancy Griffiths of Bawani, how not to spend a fortune cruising. Walter Crowe, who sailed as a cabin boy on a four-masted bark in the Oregon to Australia lumber trade, and Jay McClintock, the second person to single-hand the North Pacific after Laurier. During my teen years, I taught myself basic boat design, how to figure the center of effort, center of lateral resistance, how to draw fair lines, and make and use a table of offsets, how to loft, how to figure displacement and stability. Most of my designs were topsail schooners and gaff schooners, brigantines, even brigs, 45 to 55 foot range. In 1978, I bought Argo from my dad and made a first attempt at bringing her back to the US. This was with a crew which included my brand new wife. However, a brass outlet fitting on the bottom of a copper water tank gave out 3 days into the trip. So we had to go back to Japan, and I returned to the States. I returned to Japan in the spring of '79, prepared the ship, and then left in the early summer, this time single-handed. The North Pacific, lots of gloomy weather. Running on DR when the Celestial was unavailable. There was no GPS in those days. It was cold and rainy much of the time, and I got tired of being wet. So I rigged up a system of lines I called Manila Mike to allow me to steer from inside.
Hey, Reggie,
I
let's
kept
hold.
in radio contact with the U.S. Navy weather office at Yokosuka Base for the first several days of the trip. When we had an unexpected gale come along, I notified the weatherman afterwards, who had a bit of a chuckle, and he said that, oh yeah, the isobars turned out to be a little closer together than we expected. I encountered 3 gales during the crossing, the longest being 36 hours, bare poling with warps out the stern. 6 days with no fix, but I was only 9 miles off when I finally did get a good fix. That gale pushed us up the waves towards the Aleutians. 1,500 miles off the California coast, we experienced several calm days. Realizing that it was very difficult to get photos of one ship when underway, and Argo moving very slowly at the time, I put the dinghy in the water and went for a bit of a row. It was 60 days from Abrazávo to San Diego. I sold Argo in 1981 when my company transferred me to South Korea. After a spell, I got out my drawing board and started working on more boat plans. What was to become Rainbow started germinating. She went through many evolutions: wood and epoxy construction, ferro cement, even steel, schooner, brigantine, brig, 55-foot range. Finally, realizing that I would likely be doing mostly short or single-handed sailing, I let practicality take over and chose the same rig as Argo. For size, I let the development of the lines dictate that. She came out to be 63 foot on deck, 15.5-foot beam, 7-foot draft, 81,000 pounds displacement. I hired the boat designer George Bueller to look things over. He proposed more elegant lines above the waterline, but we left the underbody pretty much as I had drawn it. The sail plan carries 2,233 square feet. It's basically a bug-eye rig. In spite of not being a true schooner, bug-eyes are called after a schooner rig. So therefore, main, fore, and jib. Bueller sent me reams of computer printouts, but no stability calculations, which were the most important to me because I expected that the rig would be heavy and she had a sharp underbody. Bueller told me that no one did stability calculations anymore as a general thing, but he did know one fellow who would produce a set for $25,000. So I'd already done the stability calcs myself once. I recollected my data, redid the calcs, and everything turned out just fine. My company transferred me to Indonesia in 1993. It seemed like the timing, the location, and the funding were right. So I hired the only yacht builder in the country to build the ship for a contracted amount in a specified time frame. Here we are lofting out the lines on the shop floor. Transferred the lofting to patterns using the nail system. We cut the futtocks from 2.5-inch thick plantation grown Honduras mahogany. All the futtocks were fastened with 1-inch trunnels, and everything was red leaded afterwards. We made a mold to laminate the Honduras mahogany deck beams. Considerable crown to the deck, as you can see. Here are some of the teak, stem, and deadwood timbers with my young daughter in the background. The builder was working very slowly by this time and asking for more money than was contracted. And I started having second thoughts about their ability to do the work. We purchased 24,000 pounds of lead in ingots. The contractor set up 6 50-gallon drums, which they piped to a buried mold using a 2-inch pipe and 2-inch brass valves. They collected their firewood and set up for a nighttime pour. During the melting process, I noticed that they were not keeping the pipes hot. And I pointed this out to their boss, who ignored it. When the wood ran out, they attempted to pour, and only one drum poured, just enough to embed the bottom of the bolts and the 4-inch washers. The remaining 5 drums didn't pour. It took the workers several days to cut and remove the drums, the steel of the drums, and chip out the lead from the mold. Whereupon I fired the contractor and took over the job myself. I moved everything down to a vacant lot near my job site. This assembly here is the laminated teak wooden keel, lower deadwood, and lower forefoot being moved up to the road. I greased a few palms among the local constabulary, hired a lowboy tractor trailer, and transferred the whole thing through Jakarta in the wee hours past midnight. Took 3 days to move everything. The first thing to do was to pour the lead keel. So we reburied the mold, fabbed a new steel trough right here. Whoops. Let's get back where we belong. Sorry about that, folks.
Here you go, Reg. Now hit your presenter view.
Yeah, we're getting there.
All good.
Okay, back again. So where were we? Let's see. We fabbed the trough. We buried the mold. We set up forms to hold the bolts. I collected a huge amount of scrap wood, and we started our melting fire early in the afternoon. We kept everything hot and poured about midnight. I should point out that this time on the bottom of our melting pot, we had two 4-inch pipes with 4-inch brass valves, and we built fires right underneath that pipe and valves. And this time we had a successful pour. We let the lead ballast keel cool for 3 days in the ground. Then I borrowed two 10-ton chain blocks and lifted out the casting and set it up exactly where the ship would arise, got everything level. I had the boys vertically align the 26-inch-and-a-quarter bronze bolts. And then we made a plywood pattern for the bolts. We transferred the bolt pattern, the plywood pattern, to the wooden keel. I built a jig, and then we bored the ballast keel bolts. The frames above the ballast keel were bolted to the wooden keel, which we had jacked up over the ballast bolts. Then everything was lowered onto the ballast keel. While I didn't witness this last evolution, my foreman told me that all 26 keel bolts aligned up perfectly and no adjustments had been needed. I would hate to do that again. The next job was to start work on the laminated 4-foot and the deadwood. Here's the 4-foot with new pieces being added. And our boatyard on the beach. We've got deck beams laying in the foreground and more 4-foot being set up. We fit in the stem. And then the stem knee. More frames are being set up on the 4-foot. We started to cut in the garboard rabbet. Here's the first plank being fit up. All the hull planking is nominal 2-inch thick teak. All the hull in the deck planking is fastened with teak trunnels. The large bronze screws that would have been required were not available in Indonesia. I could have had them fabbed in Singapore and imported to Jakarta, but that would have cost about $10 a piece at the time, and 7,000 would have been required. That was my estimate. So we gave trunnels a try, and they've been working out very well. You might note that all the planking and the hull planking and deck planking is nibbed at the ends to eliminate splits. I had one fellow that who did nothing but make trunnels and their wedges. The dimensioning of the trunnels, of course, is very critical. They have to be exactly 0.5 millimeter larger than the hole they go into. We made patterns and had the pintles and gudgeons cast in bronze at a local shop. Here we have the deck beams, carlins, and transom in place. The deck beams are nominal 4 by 5 inches, except at openings where they're 5 by 5 inches. This is my ship construction crew. My foreman, his name was Samsudin, is standing to my left. After launch, when I let go most of the crew, I kept 2 carpenters who installed the deck planking and the cabin sole. Then I laid one off, and the remaining carpenter, Nisere, who's just over my right shoulder in the photo, he and I built the spars, skylights, houses, rails, and some of the interior. The weekend launch day was very hectic and stressful. I borrowed a crane from my job site. We put down steel plates on the beach, and I laid down an anchor as far offshore as possible. Even so, we just barely made it. Using the anchor, we hauled the ship out of the lifting slings. Fortunately, the bottom was steep too, and the ship only drew about 5.5 feet at launch. We were lucky with the crane. You'll note the steel plate in the foreground sunken in the sand. We towed the ship around to a sheltered seawall in the intake channel of a local power plant. This is where the work was completed. Here is the 2-inch thick teak deck planking being installed. We built the spars on the seawall next to the ship. All the spars were of a wood called meranti, which is a sort of a luan. It's not what I would have liked. It's heavier than I wanted, but it's all I could get. Here the bowsprits nearing completion and the foremast is being laid up. We made a router jig to cut the 12-to-1 scarves. Nisere used the hand adze to remove the discard material before running our router. My son Joshua, Nisere, and I are here maneuvering the 25.5-foot long bowsprit into position. The foremast has been laid up. It's been 8-sided, then rounded out using a 4-inch electric hand planer. After completion of the mast and coatings, both were rolled up onto the ship and secured for a trip around to the job site. One Sunday morning, I borrowed a crane and we stepped the mast. We finally got out for the first sail, 3.5 hours worth, on a Saturday morning, May 2nd, 1998. Now you may remember that all through 1997 and worsening into 1998, the economies of Asian countries were collapsing. In Indonesia, as the economy fell apart, the citizens rebelled against their government and ousted their president. Then, in keeping with the local history, they commenced an ethnic cleansing of the Chinese population, who ran most of the businesses and who were blamed by the ethnic Malay population for their economic woes. Most of the foreign companies, my own included, evacuated personnel from Jakarta to Singapore in the spring of 1998. I faced the choice of either abandoning the ship and returning to the US, or of sending my family back home while I returned to complete the work and sail out of there. I chose the latter. Jakarta was a very strange place when I returned. It's surrounded by a road called the Ring Road, which is much like the Beltway up in Washington and is normally crammed with traffic. The first few days that I was there, I was the only one on the Ring Road. The situation was not very good, and as soon as the ship was minimally ready, I departed. I'd been able to recruit a sailor from Australia named Russell and another fellow from the UK who was living in Sydney at the time. We got underway from Jakarta on July 15th, 1998. The first night out was very inauspicious, as we were caught with no wind on the upcurrent side of Sangiang Island in the Sunda Straits. A faint breeze came along in the wee hours of the morning, which carried us past the island, although well within the sound of the breakers. We'd not been able to haul the ship for bottom cleaning prior to departure. So a couple of days later, Russell and I dove under the ship to remove vast clamps of mussels growing on the bottom. We'd pull off clumps 2 and 3 feet long and watch them disappear into the depths, hoping that there was nothing down there, curious enough to follow them back to their source. With only 3.5 hours of shakedown prior to departure, there were many items requiring attention during the first couple weeks. We picked up the company of many seabirds during the trip, whom we always called Janet the Gannet or Trudy the Nudie, even if they were boobies, as was the case here. One sunny day, Russell decided to have an adventure and climbed the foremast. He got nearly to the top before I chickened out and asked him to return to the deck. From Indonesia, there was really no good, easy way to get back to the east coast of the US. The North Pacific I'd already done and wanted to try something different. The South Pacific and Cape Horn was not something I was enamored of, nor did I particularly like an uphill rounding of the Cape of Good Hope. So I opted for the Red Sea and Suez. We ran in the Southeast trades for much of the Indian Ocean crossing. We crossed the equator northbound on August 22nd. The next day was bright and sunny, with a calm sea and a light wind and a clear sky. I had just relieved Russell on watch when I suddenly became aware of a steady droning sound, for all the world like a small aircraft engine. I looked around trying to locate the source, with the sound growing louder every second. I called to Russell, who was below and about to turn in. He came back on deck, by which time the noise was so loud that we had to shout to each other to be heard, even though we were only 30 feet or so apart. The noise was deafening. We looked everywhere, but nothing was visible in the sky or on the surface. Submarine, I shouted to Russell. But again, we saw nothing, and there was no disturbance to the sea. The sound finally began to die off, then subside to nothing, the whole episode lasting perhaps 1 minute. We entered the Gulf of Aden in late August. It's a miserable place for a sailing ship. There's strong currents, light and fickle winds sometimes, strong headwinds the next. We experienced our first knockdown here early one morning. A great deal of sea life, but not a fishing boat to be seen anywhere. This is the Somali coast, which is dismal. Dust from the desert blew out over the Gulf and covered the ship continuously. September 12th, we anchored in Djibouti. The port captain moved us to a mole, which happened to be next to the slaughterhouse for camels. The quantities of flies here were biblical. I sent my UK crew home, but kept Russell. We fell in with a SEAL team, a US Navy SEAL team, which was working ops out of the US Embassy. I looked to see if there was a method of getting up the Red Sea, since it didn't look like making that passage under sail was going to work well. There were no engines available, outboard or otherwise. There were no tows available. Finally, I got a lift on a container ship as deck cargo. Originally, they were to drop us in Beirut, but I talked the captain into leaving us aboard until they reached Savona, Italy, which was their next stop. Here we are on the container ship going through the Suez Canal. Leaving Savona, we headed towards Gibraltar with 2 additional crew that we'd picked up. We got caught in a mistral with gale force winds while crossing the Gulf of Lion. We hove to for a night and a day under reef 4. Unhappily, the furled jib came loose on the bowsprit and tore itself up. We got a tow partway into Palamos, Spain, where we were able to get the jib repaired. It was become, however, that before any more serious sailing was to happen. The main thing was the blocks. They had unbushed sleeves. In spite of the sheaves being made out of lignum vitae, they were wearing out very quickly. Halyard tackle also had too many parts. We were late in the season and approaching mid-November, so the choice was to stay here until next year and try to address these issues, or to go to Barcelona and look at shipping options. I eventually chose the latter. We sailed down to Barcelona, where we made arrangements to ship back to the States. The harbor master there used his launch to tow us around to the boatyard, where the mast would be pulled and the shipping cradle would be made. As we approached the travel lift bay under tow, he cast off and moved around to the stern, where I expected that he would put another line aboard to slow us down. Not a bit. Instead, he lay off about 50 feet and watched us as we headed for the bay at about 4 knots. Russell on the bow threw a 1-inch line to the dockhand and attempted to slow the ship. The polypropylene line snapped as soon as strain came on it. I had another line on the quarter, a 1-inch Dacron, which I threw to the dockhand and then took a couple of quick turns around the quarter bit. With much squealing and noise, the ship came to a stop just inches from the concrete end of the bay. Needless to say, I was not pleased with our harbor master. The container ship arrived in Baltimore during the first week of February 1999. Very cold, windy, and choppy in the bay, in the harbor. The container ship placed Rainbow in the water and put the spars on the dock. I moved the ship around to a slight shelter we had around a corner of the mole, borrowed an articulating forklift from the dock foreman, and moved the spars to the ship. I hired a crane to come in and step the mast in the bowsprit, which was a bit hard to do in the choppy conditions. However, in 2 days, we were done and ready. We left Baltimore one night under very icy conditions, which lasted all the way down the bay. Since arriving at our home port in Cartagena Creek, off the St. Mary's River in St. Mary's County, we made friends with the local traditional ships. Here we come up to the Maryland Dove, home ported in St. Mary's City. As soon as I could, I started work to complete the ship. The first thing was to install bronze sleeve bearings in all the blocks. I then re-rigged all the halyards and sheets. I completed the interior, installed a generator, mechanical reefer, 4 bladder water tanks, added a 200-gallon per day water maker, AIS transceiver, chart plotter, hydrovane steering, and movable solar panels, among other things, which make her suitable for single handing. Today, to this date, there is still no inboard engine, and we use a push boat to get in and out of our creek. The interior of the ship finished up rather well. Here is the salon looking forward. And the galley looking forward. Here is the forecastle with 3 bunks and the forepeak beyond with the chain locker and cable tier. Our 200-gallon per day water maker. The salon looking aft. Top loading mechanical reefer is visible, and the antique recording barograph mounted on the bulkhead. The chart house port side. We have drawers for our paper charts. We keep paper charts of the cruising area in addition to what we have on our chart plotter. Above the drawers, we'll see our trip log, which came across the North Pacific with me, the lead line on the bulkhead, and the steering just visible beyond the ladder. The tiller was ordered as ironwood, but was delivered as ebony. And we probably have one of the few, if not the only, ebony tiller around. Here's the chart house on the starboard side, VHF radio. The HF radio is behind the laptop, which is the HF radio is open to the amateur bands as well. and it can receive NavTex and weather facts. The AIS transceiver is up under the deck, and the laptop is open and running OpenCPN. Here's a look at the underbody during our last haul out in 2020. Rainbow hauls out every 3 years for bottom maintenance and painting. (2020) new bottom paint and boot top complete and ready to go back in the water. Since retiring some years ago, we've had the ship out to Bermuda with the crew. We've been offshore numerous times, sometimes with the crew, more often without. Sometimes it's rough. Here we are about 150 miles out, hove to during a gale. Single handing, of course. But sometimes it's very nice. Here we are after the same gale. You'll notice the chain crotch tackle still rigged to the main boom. And sometimes it's very quiet. Here we are underway in the Potomac with my daughter. And now we're approaching the end of this presentation. I'd like to again thank the American Schooner Association and the Great Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race for providing this opportunity. The next and final slide I have shows the ship's Facebook page address, as well as my email address, should anyone wish to contact us. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending, and a Merry Christmas to all. It's Wednesday, June 12th, just after noon. Breeze just picked up again. I hove to for an hour at 11 o'clock to take a little bit of a nap because I was getting pretty tired. We're about 60, 70 miles offshore probably, headed roughly southeast, and we're coming up on the 1,000 fathom line.
Well, there you go, Reggie. Excellent job. I want everybody to give him a big hand for the technical side. Whoa!
You get all the applause, not me.
Oh my God, yesterday at 10 o'clock, this was a real mess. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we have both a chat running and a Q&A box. So if you have any questions, please take a second and type them in and get them across. And having done that, let's see what we got, a Q&A over here, and good. Reggie, one of the questions I have here is what was your employment? Who was your employer when you ended up in Indonesia?
I worked for an international heavy construction company by the name of Bechtel. And at the time we were building combined cycle power plants in Indonesia.
Got it. Got it. Very cool. That sounds like a real mess to have that lead pour aborted. You must have been incredibly frustrated.
It was, yeah. Yes, it was.
That was
kind of the final straw for that contractor.
John, do you have something?
Yes, Reggie, if I wanted to purchase a vessel such as Rainbow, where should I look?
I'm going to say Carthagena Creek. She's the only one built to that design. Bueller has a video essay on his website, even though he's passed away, his website still exists, and he still has the plans. And but as far as I know, there has not been another one built.
And Rainbow is not on the market, is that correct?
It could be.
Everything's
And the
for
reason would be that I'm 74 now, and it won't be too much more time that I can sail it. Let's put it that way.
Well, we enjoyed seeing you with hair, I'll tell you that. Now, Reg, you told me something interesting the other day, that you used felt between the lead ballasted keel and the boat itself, a very thin layer of felt. Could you describe that a little bit?
Well, normally what you would put between the lead ballast or the ballast keel and the wooden keel would be construction felt. I
Yeah.
suppose just like you use in a house. We couldn't get that in Indonesia. So what we did was utilize a material that was in the same spirit that would kind of create a gasket between the lead and the wood. And that happened to be pool table felt,
Love it.
which my wife scoured Jakarta to find. And that's what we used, and it's worked well since then.
That's a great story. Hey, I've got a question here from Mike McGinn. He says, when's your next voyage out into the Atlantic?
Hopefully next season. Right now, I'm finishing up some maintenance repairs, and that'll probably extend into the spring. Then we have haul out scheduled for probably the end of April, beginning May. And after that, we'll just be looking for windows of opportunity to go back out again.
You are a glutton for punishment. I've got something here from Chris Lundberg, which is a question I had asked you earlier. Wait a minute, he says, exclamation mark. You built this while having both a wife and a job? Well done. What is next for you and Rainbow?
Well, we certainly wouldn't want to build anything like this again with a job and a wife and all three at the same time. What's ahead for me and Rainbow is just to keep going as long as we can. As long as I can keep the ship maintained, that's probably the biggest chore right now.
Mm-hmm.
And try to keep myself in shape. I lift weights as a hobby, so that's a necessary thing.
Yeah, I can believe that. Gerardus, gosh, I'm sorry, Gerardus, I can't pronounce your name. Olsthoon asks, where did you get your sails made? Would you have them done there again?
Yes, the sails are Lee sails out of Hong Kong, and they did a very good job. Unfortunately, that's under communist control now, so I don't know if their quality control has suffered. I would hope not. I did have a jib made locally from Quantum over in Solomon's, and that is also very well done.
Excellent. John, do you have some familiarity with those guys?
Yes, Mystic Whaler had Lee sails for 40 years, and the quality improved steadily over those 4 decades.
Yeah.
But the last suit we ordered was probably 8 years ago, I want to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had good luck with the Lees.
Yeah. Gerardus writes, I found that, I think he's talking about the ballast to keel. I found that fiber-filled tar works well to separate wood and metal, he says. And then from Mr. Anonymous Attendee, Do you have any design specs or plans to include an onboard propulsion engine?
Let me tell you the story about how the engine came not to be. When we were first starting out with the building project and the boat was still in pieces, I started looking for an engine because originally we were going to put an engine in it. And in all of Jakarta, the only engine we could find was a 40 horsepower air-cooled Lister. And the people that had it wanted $25,000 for it,
Oh my God.
not including a marine transmission.
Oh, God.
So you might remember the boat that I mentioned earlier, the Claymore, the Herreshoff 36. That boat had an engine, but it never ran. And so we sailed that everywhere we wanted to go. So I kind of learned how to get by without an engine. So when I found out that this air-cooled Lister was going to cost me 40 grand plus, I just decided, the heck with this. We'll just go without it.
Oh, man.
And so the interior of the boat was laid out was laid out and built not to accommodate an engine. There might be a possibility of putting an engine in, but it would take a bit of work to do.
Yeah. Now, you told me you're using a push boat. So describe how that works when you want to go sailing on the bay.
I'm sorry I didn't include a picture of it. I looked for one today and I know I've got one, but I couldn't find it. The push boat is a 14-foot aluminum smoker. And I use that because it's big enough to do the job and light enough to hoist on board. I would love to have a wooden boat, but that would be too heavy.
Yeah.
The push boat has a sort of a fork mounted on the stem, through bolted to some oak partners, and that fork fits around the vertical shaft of the hydrovane steering. The vertical shaft of the hydrovane is very stout. It's like a Schedule 40 or heavier pipe. And that fork fits around that. And then I have two guys which run from the quarter bits on the ship back to cleats on either side of the push boat near the stern. And then I have an 1.5 inch PVC pipe that runs from the throttle handle of the outboard up to the wheel on the ship.
Oh, man.
And that mercury, the push boat has a 20 horsepower mercury, which has in handle, throttle, and gear shift. So by moving that, by turning the PVC pipe, I can have speed, forward, and reverse.
Wow.
And so when we're sailing in the bay, generally I tow the push boat. When I go offshore, I hoist it aboard.
Yeah. Pretty cool. Jordis asks again, except for the fired foreman, did you find your hired crews competent in Jakarta, I suppose he means?
I have to admit, I fired lots of guys before I ended up with a decent crew. They know how to use their tools, and many of them have built boats before, but nobody has built to a Western configuration.
Mm.
So I had to teach them how to put this ship together. They were quite satisfactory in handling their tools and did good work. They just had to be guided into how to use them.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, we got some space here in your Q&A. If you're looking at your screens, there's probably a little Q&A button down at the bottom. So if anybody else has questions, tap along. John, you got something?
All good here.
Yeah, good.
I'm very grateful to Reggie for putting this presentation together.
Pretty nice. You know, I'm reminded, Reggie, of you're talking about they parked you right next to the camel slaughterhouse.
Oh, yeah,
Got to be a story there.
it was dreadful.
Oh,
Well, yeah, um, I went to the port captain and complained about it,
yeah,
and he told me because what they were doing was the slaughterhouse was throwing offal and discards out on the just outside of their building,
really.
right on the mole.
Oh, God.
And when I complained to him, he got rather upset and said, "Well, I'm not supposed to be doing that." And he went down there and got all over him, and they stopped doing it and cleaned it up.
Really?
But there was still a couple of days when it was
Oh,
monumental.
and how long were you down there?
We were at that mole for, gosh, I don't know. If Russell is on, he may remember here, but it seems to me we were there like 3 weeks.
That's a lot of dead camels.
Yeah,
My next question, did you have auto steering or self-steering when you went across the Indian Ocean?
no, nope. We had our 3 guys. We ran 3 watches
Yeah.
most of the time, and no, I didn't put the hydrovane on until, oh gosh, it's been maybe 5 or 6 years now.
My goodness. My
Yeah,
goodness.
even the one video at the end of the presentation where we were sailing offshore, that that was without self-steering, without wind vane.
Oh, it's pretty impressive. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have made it all the way to 8 o'clock Eastern Standard. And it's time for us to wrap it up. Any last questions we have coming in, type them now or forever hold your peas. Reggie, this has been a very impressive job. Oh, it looks like Russell's responded. He says,
Russell just answered me.
yeah, 3 weeks is about right.
Not right.
You didn't mention the
Yeah, I was
birds.
thinking that's what it was.
You didn't mention the birds that ate the offal and pooped all over the boat.
Well, I think the flies drove the birds away.
Oh, God. Oh, my goodness. And then last, we looks like we have Jerry Ormsby writes, is the fuel for your push boat stored on board? I think he means on Rainbow.
When I'm in the bay, we have a regular outboard fuel tank, whatever that is, 8 gallons,
Yeah.
I think they are. When I go offshore, that tank comes up and is stored on deck right there at the stern.
Yeah.
And usually I carry a spare, another tank, same size, and those are both carried right on the stern of the ship. And the outboard is also stowed on a mount at the stern.
Right. So you can kind of take it apart a little bit. And last question coming in, looks like we have the captain of Maryland Dove. Bill Gates says, if you built Rainbow again, is there anything you would change?
If I built Rainbow again, one thing I would do probably is slightly shorten the mast, maybe take 6 feet or 7 feet off the top. And I would also raise the booms up an additional foot, maybe. My wife says put an engine in it, which might be a possibility as well. The other thing is I might consider adding 8, 10, or 12 inches to the beam.
Nice, nice. All right, my friends, it is 8 plus 8. We're after 8 now. And I want to thank you all for joining us. And on behalf of the American Schooner Association and the Great Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race. I want to thank our friend Reg Townsend here. He has really stuck to his task. This is a tough thing to do, to pull this together, and thank you so much, Reg.
Well, thank you for all your efforts.
Absolutely.
you,
Now,
Reg.
ladies and gentlemen, I would love it if any of you have any ideas of who else can be a presenter for us. Please send them over to me. I would love to include them. And you can find me just by, excuse me, going on to gcbsr.org, Great Chesapeake Bay Schooning Race.org, and contact us, and you'll be able to send a message, which will sooner or later get to me. John, thank you very much for sitting in with us all.
And thank you all.
All right. I wish you all a very happy holiday season. Merry Christmas if that's what you do, and happy holidays if it's not. Have a wonderful time, and thank you so much, everyone. This will be available as a recording on both of our websites, probably by midday tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Duncan.